my name's Amy and I have borderline personality disorder. This is like Alcoholics Anonymous or something. I'm going to be talking a little about things like self-harm and suicide and childhood traumas. I'm not going to be too graphic with anything or go into specifics of anything. It's just going to be vaguely talking about each of those things. So if you're okay with that, then carry on watching. If you watch my videos, then you'll know that I've been planning on making this video for about the past week now. If you need a cup of tea or a wee or anything like that, or a snack, go and get it now because we're going to be here a while, I imagine. For those of you who don't know what borderline personality disorder is, or a lot of the time it's just shortened to BPD, because borderline personality disorder is a bit of a mouthful. It's basically a mental illness that you develop as you're growing up, so from very early childhood. What it means for people that suffer with BPD is they have trouble controlling their emotions. So whereas someone without the illness, throughout the day, they can stay pretty much a stable emotion through the whole day, and certain things throughout the day can make them happy or sad. So if they get a bit of bad news, that can make them a bit upset. If they get a bit of good news, that can make them happy. It doesn't really work that way with BPD. A lot of the time throughout the day you can be lots of different emotions. You have no control over them whatsoever. They can be triggered by certain things, or you can just have mood swings for no reason at all. So throughout the day you could start off the day being really happy, and then a couple of hours later really sad, a couple of hours later really angry, a couple of hours later back to happy. And it's not always sort of within that sort of time frame either. The mood changes can be even quicker than that, so they can be every few minutes, or they can also be every few days. You also have periods of time where you feel emotionally numb. It's the only way I can describe it, so you don't really feel anything at all. It's very confusing. You don't really understand how you feel or why you feel the way you do a lot of the time. So obviously that can be very distressing. It's also distressing for people in your life, so your family and friends. A lot of the time someone with BPD, their friends or family could describe them as being a drama queen or something like that. And the reality is people with BPD, they just don't know how to control what they're feeling, and they don't understand what they're feeling. Let's say this morning I didn't feel well enough to do the washing up, okay? And my boyfriend said to me, "It's fine, I'll do it." And I perceived the tone of his voice to sound like he was pissy with me. And he wasn't, it was just that I was overanalyzing what he was saying to me. So that then triggered loads of emotions. I felt guilty, I felt angry, I felt defensive. So I got really angry at him and I snapped at him and I was shouting. I was like, "Why do you need to talk to me like that? I'll just do the effing washing up, whatever, just leave it." I said, "I'm poorly, you don't understand." And that's because since my childhood I haven't learnt the appropriate coping mechanisms to deal with lots of emotions, so I don't know how to process guilt or process anything like that. And also because people with BPD can be very over analytical, shall we say, of things that other people say and do. We're very perceptive when it comes to people's moods, their facial expressions, their tone of voice, just every behaviour that someone has. We analyse everything they do, and obviously we don't get it right all the time, we don't get it right most of the time, so we can take things the wrong way, which then can trigger a lot of mood swings, as I said. And because we're confused and we don't know how to process these emotions, a lot of the time we have a lot of outbursts of anger. The only way we know how to deal with the intense emotions that we're feeling is by shouting or throwing things or punching things or things like that. I saw my CPN last week. She's my mental health nurse, if you don't know what a CPN is. And she actually said something really interesting to me the other day, and I don't want anyone with BPD watching this to take it the wrong way, but she said that having BPD is like emotionally feeling like a child but being in an adult's body, and I think that's quite accurate. I said before, you can also have periods of time where you feel emotionally numb, you don't really feel anything at all, and what I mean by that is things that are supposed to make you sad or happy, sometimes they just don't affect you, you feel nothing, and that can also be very disturbing. So something really quite bad can happen and you feel nothing towards it. And what's interesting with BPD, especially with me, I find that little things in my life, like little trivial day-to-day things, can set off my mood swings. But if I have a big event in my life, like, I don't know, the death of a family member or something like that, and it sounds awful, I don't mean it to, but I don't feel anything, and I don't feel anything for a very long time, and that in itself is a coping mechanism. Every emotion that we feel as it is, even just day to day, is so intense. It's really hard to explain. There's not a feeling of emotion any more extreme than what we feel on a day-to-day basis anyway. So I think what happens when something really bad or good happens is our emotions go and shut off, because there is just nothing, there is no beyond, we can't deal with it. But I can't imagine how I would have made it this far in life if I didn't react that way when something really bad happened. I couldn't imagine. Sort of on the same lines as that, we feel, some of us anyway, can feel very spaced out a lot of the time. I read on a website a while ago that people with BPD live in a exclusive fantasy land of their own creating. So we're spaced out a lot of the time, we spend a lot of the time thinking, analysing things, trying to figure out how we're feeling, trying to figure out who we are, just thinking about everything. It's very confusing. So that means we can have really poor concentration, and because of that we can also have really poor memory. Personally, my memory's awful. I can't remember most things from my childhood. I can't remember what happened yesterday or the day before, so I have to keep lots of different journals where I write down how I'm feeling day after day, otherwise I just have no idea. And you could show me a page in my journal from a few days ago and honestly I wouldn't be able to tell you where I was when I was writing it, or that I even remembered writing it. You can also have delusions, you remember things very differently to how they happened. You can hallucinate as well, so you can hear and see things that aren't there. I don't know too much about that side of it myself because personally I've not, well, as far as I'm aware, I've not had any hallucinations. We have a strong feeling of paranoia a lot of the time. We can be paranoid that people don't like us or overly critical of the work we do. So I used to really love doing art, but I used to be so paranoid that it would not be good enough that I would throw it all in the bin. And I think a lot of that paranoia is tied into one of the main symptoms of BPD, which is intense fear of abandonment. Any friends or family or pets that are in our lives, we can be very paranoid that they're going to leave us. A lot of this stuff is very normal for people to feel, but what you need to remember with BPD is while people without BPD feel it maybe a little bit every now and then, people with BPD feel it all the time at a constant, really high level. So because you're so emotionally charged all the time and your mind is just racing all the time, it can be so exhausting. So you're tired all the time. So we can go to extreme measures to make sure that people don't abandon us, whether it be a family member or a boyfriend or a pet, anything like that. I want to talk about my childhood and why I think I have BPD a bit later on, but I just wanted to mention this as I was talking about the fear of abandonment. In particular, my biological dad, he left when I was very young, so then my stepdad kind of took on the role of being my dad. And what I did was, very impulsively, one day I decided to get this tattoo. I hope you can see it properly. It's a massive feather on my back with his full name written the whole way down my spine. Not just a little tattoo, a huge tattoo. And now that I've been diagnosed with BPD, I realise that the reason that I got that tattoo must have been because I was scared that he'd leave me like my biological dad did. Because we can be so paranoid and because of our mood swings and just extreme preventative measures to stop people abandoning us, it can be very hard to maintain relationships with anyone, whether that be with friends, family or romantic relationships. It can be very hard for other people to understand our condition, particularly if you're undiagnosed. And it can be very hard for us to be in a relationship. Another big symptom for BPD that we get, and this is one that frustrates me a lot, is we have such confusion about our identity. So we don't really have a sense of self, we don't know who we are, and it changes all the time. So stuff in my house changes all the time, my clothes style changes all the time, my hairstyle, my makeup, my opinions change all the time, my opinions towards things, the things I like and dislike, like with food, music and TV, things like that, changes all the time. And it can also change and adapt depending on a certain group of people I'm with. So it's like I have thousands of different personalities and I just pick and choose which one I'm going to be on each day. One of the more distressing things about BPD as well is we can be very prone to self-destructive behaviours, so self-harming, we can think about suicide a lot, and around 10% of people with the illness do attempt to end their life at some point. Personally, I have had 2 experiences with this, and I hope to God that I'm never that low again. A lot of the time it can be just when you're having an extreme mood swing and you don't know how to handle your emotions and you just want it to end. That's how you feel at the time because it's so extreme. There's nothing I can say there's nothing that I can say in words to explain to someone without this illness what it feels like to be in our heads and our bodies. We feel emotion in every part of us and so intensely. I've said to my boyfriend before, imagine how you felt at your most happiest in your life, how you felt at the saddest time in your life and the most angriest time in your life, and that's how we feel every day about everything. So imagine that your life was like that every day. It's hard to live with, so it's unsurprising that the suicide rate of people with this illness is so high, because you have to be such a warrior to fight this illness. I'm going to get emotional, and I very rarely cry, which is really weird. I just want to say to people that share my illness, that are watching this video, or think they even might have this illness, that you are so brave and you are so strong for fighting every day. I know how hard it is, but just remember, our moods change so often and we don't feel the same way all the time. So if you feel really crap at the moment, just remember that, you know, an hour later you might not feel like this, so just always push through it. Ending your life is not the answer. Even though we feel really bad things, we also are so lucky that we feel positive things so intensely as well. So when we feel love, it's euphoric. When we are excited, it's like we're a kid at Christmas. So just remember that although there is a lot of bad with our illness, there is also so much good. And I promise it does get easier as you get older. It really does. BPD could be caused by a traumatic event in your childhood that happened just the one time, or it can also be exposed trauma over a very long period of time. I think I'd like to talk a bit about my own upbringing now, and why I believe I have BPD. So I was brought up by a mother who suffers with a lot of mental health issues herself. So she has anxiety, depression, OCD and agoraphobia. My mother did the best job she could raising me. Being as unwell as I am now, I think it's amazing that she could raise a daughter all by herself with the issues that she has. It's absolutely incredible. It must be hard enough doing it on your own when you're sound of mind, let alone when you're unwell. But at the same time, there were times when I had to deal with her in a depressive episode. I had to see her very anxious a lot of the time, or I remember there were times from when I was very young that I would have to go to the shop because she was too scared to go outside. And she's told me this story before. I don't personally remember it myself because I think I was too young, but she said to me that she used to watch me from the window in the block of flats that we live in, and she used to watch me cross the road and go to the shop, and watch me cross the road and come home to make sure I didn't get hit by a car or anything. So in a lot of ways I was a carer for her a lot of the time. I would see my dad on weekends. I don't know if I saw him every weekend or every other weekend. I don't know if this happened all of the time. I remember it happening once where I got all my stuff ready and I was sat waiting on some stairs looking out the window waiting for his car to pull up, and I was there for about an hour and he didn't show up, and my mum called him, and I don't know if he'd forgotten that he was supposed to have me or if he had something on that weekend that my mum had forgotten. But then my poor mum, bless her, had to tell me that my dad wasn't coming that weekend, and she had to deal with me having a massive mood swing, crying my eyes out, telling her I hated her and all of this. Then my mum met my stepdad, and bless him, he was fantastic towards me. He treated me like his own daughter. He was a little bit intimidating, but that was just his character. He worked in the army, and my mum had two girls with him, so my two younger sisters. And obviously as he was in the army we would travel around a lot, so we would move house. I'm not sure how frequently it was, it must have been on average at least once a year. So every time we moved, me and my sisters would have to make complete new friends, move into a completely new area and get used to the area and get used to having a new room and packing up our lives and moving all the time. And nothing ever felt permanent. So I think a lot of that has contributed to my BPD, because the friends that I made, I would never make, you know, a best friend. I would never get too attached. Well, at the first few times that we moved, I remember I was absolutely devastated when we moved away from that place and when they had to tell me we were moving, and I would cry so much at leaving my friends and my school and everything. It was absolutely heartbreaking, and we had to do it so often. But then each time we did it, I got more and more emotionally detached. Oh, I'm feeling a bit sick making this video. I know it sounds silly, but talking about my childhood is quite hard. Then when I was 9, my biological dad came and told me that he was moving to Australia with his wife. There's no words that I have in this world that I have to describe the grief that I felt when he told me that. And I basically haven't spoken to my dad since. We carried on moving around a few times, and then she left my stepdad and we moved to Wales, where I was bullied horrifically. After a while living in Wales, my mum fell in love and decided that she would move in with a man that she'd met. So we moved again from Wales, and it's very hard for me to talk about this in particular because it's a very touchy subject, but my stepdad turned around to me and my sisters one day and said that my mum had said to him that he would have to have me and my sisters or she was going to put us in care because her new fella didn't like us, he didn't want us. And that was devastating to deal with. I absolutely adored my stepdad. I looked to him like he was my real dad. He was absolutely incredible, and he never once treated me like I wasn't one of his daughters. I decided I'd move out and get my own place. Do you know what? This is really taking it out of me. This is such a hard video to film. After I moved out, I tried going to college lots of times and I tried lots of different jobs, but I couldn't hold anything down. I would go at it really hard for about 6 weeks and then I'd have to leave because I wasn't well enough to work, basically. And because my sense of identity changed all the time, I could never decide what I wanted to do as a career. My stepdad, he gradually started talking to me less and less after he met his new wife, and I found it very strange, and I put lots of effort in, and I would call him and he would be very short with me, and you know, I'd like send him birthday cards and presents and stuff, and gradually over time he would just talk to me less and less. And then I remember one year I didn't get a card from him at Christmas, and I knew straight away that, because I'd been there before, I knew what was happening. I knew that he didn't want to continue a relationship with me, which was absolutely devastating because not only I'd had the rejection from my biological father, I'd had the rejection from my biological mother, and I'd opened myself up and the same thing happened. I felt the rejection from him as well. And it's so hard when not only your mother and father reject you, but then to have two fathers reject you, I can't even tell you what that does to your self-esteem and how you see yourself. I started self-harming because I just thought I was worthless. I would binge eat, so I started putting on more and more and more weight until I got very, very obese. I was about, at my heaviest I was 20 stone, and I've lost about 4 or 5 stone since then, but I was very, very unwell. My whole life I've never had any stability with anything really. But anyway, let's get past that. So like I said, just repeated traumas over your childhood can cause you to have BPD, or it could even just be just a single trauma in your life, and it might even be something that you don't remember. So if you think you might have BPD, you need to go to your GP and you need to explain that you believe you have a lot of symptoms of BPD, and what they'll do is they'll ask you some questions. I can't remember what my GP asked me now, but they'll ask you some questions, and if they agree with you, they'll set up a referral for you to have a chat with a mental health nurse. And then once you've spoken to the mental health nurse, she'll then decide whether or not you need a diagnosis from a psychiatrist or what help you might need. Be aware that this can take months, and I mean months. In a whole, it probably took 1.5 years from me first going to my GP and actually getting a formal diagnosis. So I don't want you to let that scare you. Just be aware that it is a long process and it does take a lot of time, not just because the waiting lists are really long, but also they need to be sure that what they're diagnosing you with is actually what you have. One thing I would suggest to you is whenever you feel very unwell, rather than staying home, make sure you go to your doctors, make sure you call your doctor or make an appointment, because each doctor you see, all they know about you is the notes that they have on you, and if you're not telling them all the time that you don't feel well, then they don't know. They don't have that record. So you could say, I've been feeling this way for years and years and years and no one's done anything about it. They'll say to you, well, you've only come in, twice over these years to tell us you felt unwell. Why aren't you coming in more? So make sure you really take charge of your own health. Even if you feel like what you're thinking is very disturbing or dark, or you think it's really fucked up, for lack of a better word, write it down, tell your GP. If you don't like the GP you're seeing and you don't feel like they have enough empathy for you and your situation, ask for another one. You're well within your rights to do that. One thing I did want to say about getting diagnosed is they would always tiptoe around trying to say the illness that I had. And when they officially diagnosed me, they were like, how do you feel about that? And I think that's because a lot of people, they can, get very upset, or they take the diagnosis completely the wrong way. And I think that's just not the right attitude to have. I think what you need to think about diagnosis is you've been the way you have been for your whole life, and just you getting a label put on the illness that you have, it doesn't change anything about you. If anything, it helps you, because once they know what illness you have, they can make sure that you get the right treatment that you need. So there's no reason to feel embarrassed by having BPD or having the thoughts you do and feeling the way you do. It's completely normal for us. We're a bit bonkers, not gonna lie. And if you've got an illness, don't let your treatment or recovery be compromised by you feeling embarrassed by how you feel, because you're wasting time. There is no specific treatment for BPD, but because a lot of people with BPD can get depression, anxiety, you might be you might be prescribed an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication, but just be aware that it might not help. Personally, I've trialled, I think it's 5 different tablets now, 5 different tablets at different dosages, and I've not found anything that works. You will be prescribed talking therapies, so you might have CBT, or I know they're offering DBT a lot now to a lot of people. At the moment I'm going through art therapy, which I'm finding very useful. It does get easier as you get older, and I can tell you now the difference in me now to how I was 5 years ago. 5 years ago I was an emotional wreck, and I was always screaming and shouting and breaking things and hurting myself. And now, 5 years later, although I do have mood swings, although I do have mood swings still, I'm much more emotionally stable now than I was then, and I very rarely self-harm now. And things do get better. You learn how to cope with how you're feeling, and you learn better coping mechanisms, and I promise you it just gets easier. It honestly does. There's a great community on Twitter of people with BPD, and that's probably been the most helpful thing for me in the time that I've been unwell, is talking to other people with BPD, because I used to think I was so weird, like I did the weirdest things and I felt the weirdest things, but once you start talking to other people with the same illness, you're like, oh my god, I'm not as weird as I thought I was, and it's great. And you know, it's just so nice talking to people who actually get it. Don't isolate yourself, I think, is the main thing. Although a lot of the time I know that's all you want to do, just try and push past it, because communication is key. I'm sorry this has been such a long video. You're always very welcome to talk to me on Twitter if you're worried that you might have the same thing, or you just wanted to talk about having this illness or anything like that. You're very, very, very welcome to talk to me on Twitter, and I will help you as much as I can. But I think I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm absolutely emotionally drained. That was so hard to film, which is very unexpected. I didn't think it would be that difficult, but it really was. But it was very important to me that I did it, so I'm really glad that I did. Anyway, I'll let you go now because this is probably going to be hours long. Yay! Woo, editing! Okay, stay safe. Bye.